This is FBG Jen.
And FBG Kristen.
And I'm FBG Margot, host and producer. You're listening to the podcast that will help you keep a lid on the junk in the trunk and inspire you to live a happy and confident life.
Each episode, we chat with motivational experts and celebs and share our own candid adventures in being healthy.
If you're looking for a podcast that's equal parts hilarious and enlightening, well then welcome to the Fit Bottomed Girls podcast.
Welcome back to the Fit Bottomed Girls podcast. This is FBG Margot, and on the line today we have FBG Jen.
Hey.
And we have FBG Kristen.
Hi.
And you guys, we have such a great guest today, Amy Baltzell. What did you think of her?
I loved her.
Me too.
She had so many, you can definitely tell that she's a little bit more of a scientist. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like her brain is very, she thinks about the details and like gets right to it, which I don't mind at all. But she had such an interesting take on, and especially from the beginning of the interview to the end of the interview, it's like we all kind of like became friends. At first, we were just kind of like answering questions back and forth, and then I felt like by the end there was, I don't know. Do you guys? I felt like we had some sort of connection with her, right?
She likes our show. I stopped recording at some point, and she started paying us the compliments about how much she likes this podcast. So I was like, oh man, that's so cool. We have fans.
She was like, it's so funny because she was so like scientific and clearly like attention to detail, but she studies mindfulness. Yeah. So it's like you have this very like numbers kind of heavy thing, performance based everything. And then with the mindfulness, which is a little bit more like, oh, you have good vibes and here's energy. And it's a little bit more woo-woo-y. And she's bringing them together and showing that stuff, like really does matter to athletes and, how they perform, and everything is so interconnected at such an elite level, but that also does translate down to us, to everyday non-Olympic folk, just going about for a workout or just trying to have, a good day and live a good life. I found it really interesting. What did you think, Kristen?
Yeah, she was fascinating. And I'm, through a lot of the training I've done for USA triathlon coaching, like there is definitely a sports psychology aspect to it. And that's actually my favorite part to get into, if we're being honest. Mm-hmm. So she kind of took that and, went a bridge farther, which I loved. So yeah, super cool. I also felt bonded at the end.
Yeah, I felt that bond too. Yeah, she was so warm and friendly, and she's so wise. I'm fascinated by sports psychology. What kind of, you can get in physical shape to do just about anything, but we all know like it's the mental game is just as important, if not more important. So I'm always like interested in like a top athlete, how they think, how they handle stress, how they handle nerves, because like I'm a nervous person. So how do they deal with those? So I wanted to ask you guys, do you have any pre-race or pre-game struggles, that you faced, and how do you manage them?
So yeah, I can definitely be a nervous Nelly before I do any sort of running race. Even sometimes if it's a challenging workout at the gym I go to, the Fit Pit here in Kansas City, sometimes even before like a really hard workout, like I'll get butterflies in my stomach before the normal workout. Like I'm not competing against anybody. Like it's just kind of like daunting or scary, and I get and I have to kind of calm myself down. There's also a competition that is done every year at the Fit Pit called the Throwdown, which is a pretty intense like couple day event. And yeah, I'm always just like a ball of nerves before that with TMI, like bad poo and like the whole 9 yards. And when I played tennis in high school, it was the same. It was the same way. Like virtually any match I played, I would get, nervous before, and it would take me a long time to really settle down. And I wish that I had, at that point, I wish that I had had more resources, because I think I would have been a better like tennis player if I had a better handle on some of that, because especially when you get into, a sport, any sport, where you are competing and what you're doing is very calculated movements, so like gymnastics or tennis or something where you're kind of like on the spot. I like if you don't have the confidence or the sturdiness in yourself, like it is hard to just perform at your best. It's hard to kind of get into that magical flow spot. I always found that when I was doing group sports, that was always a little bit easier because it wasn't like all the pressure wasn't on you.
Right.
I feel like Amy could have had a heyday with me when I was younger. She could probably still have a heyday with me before stuff, but there's so much more talk about it now that I think it makes it a little bit easier, and I have a better self-awareness now. Like, oh my gosh, I'm really nervous. Okay, how can I calm down? Well, let's just take some deep breaths, let's just focus on what your goal is. And then I have little things that I kind of say to myself, like, run your own race is one that I say a lot. Like, it's not about anyone else. Just focus on you, do your best, get in it. You can do this. And then you can do anything. After I had my daughter, like after I gave birth, like,
yeah, I'm sure.
Sometimes I'll compare to birth. That's how I get my brain to be like, oh honey, this is nothing. Like you had natural childbirth. You can get through a few burpees today. Like, you got this, girl. And so I kind of play that role with myself in my head. But yeah, I think we all have, like, that's all pretty normal, right?
It's totally normal.
Yeah. Although I have to say, I think it's really funny that what you had to say about like single person sports versus team sports, because I feel the opposite.
Like all the pressure's on you because other people are depending on you.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Like in high school when I played volleyball, I was much better when I was just like out somewhere playing volleyball with other people versus literally anytime my coach was anywhere nearby. Or anytime some of the older girls on the team were around and ready to yell at me for making a mistake, that I honestly never got past that in that scenario, which is super unfortunate because I loved volleyball and it ended up becoming a really not fun thing to do. So like I played club, but
how messed up that they yelled at you? That's messed up.
Yeah, they were not nice. Yeah. So if I've got any like juniors or seniors in high school out there and you've got a freshman or a sophomore up on your varsity team and they seem a little nervous, maybe try being nice to them for a second and see if that improves their play, because I'll tell you what, if you yell at me, I'm not going to set you the damn ball. I'm just not. So anyway.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. You got anything else you want to tell them?
Get it out right now, Kristen.
Group therapy. Here we go.
Oh God. Yeah. Let's not go down that rabbit hole. But so what I've found is, now the majority of things that I do are, running races or triathlon, and I get a little bit nervous, but I actually have learned to kind of love that feeling of butterflies, because it's not debilitating for me. It doesn't cause me, I don't have to spend more time in the bathroom or, do anything. It's just, it's almost just like a recognition of like, oh, this is not your normal day. And you have put work into this, and it's worth feeling different for. And happily, I usually get past that pretty quickly. But for one of the biggest races I ever did, I was quite nervous. It was a half Ironman, and I'd never really done that before. And I was definitely nervous just because it's a it's a lot to compete, and it's a long time to keep it all together. So the day before the race, I actually sat kind of near the start area, and I had walked and driven a lot of the course, so I knew what to expect. And I sat down and I pictured each part, and obviously not like with a 1-to-1 ratio of current, of the actual time versus that, because it took me like 6.5 hours to finish the race. So, but I would just picture different parts on the course, and I would picture myself feeling strong and happy and confident at each one of those points. And I would really let my sink into my body and let my body feel that strength and that capability. And I pictured it at different parts of the course that I knew were going to be tough. And I pictured it like on that second run loop when I was going to be going past all the things that I had already seen, and I knew that I still had, half of a half marathon to go. Like, I knew that would be tough mentally, but I pictured it, and my God, you guys, that was like the greatest trick of my life. I was still super nervous at the start, but not as bad as I have been for other big races, and I felt great through the whole thing. Even the the little parts that I knew were going to be scary and make me a little bit nervous, I got right through them. And I really credit a lot of that to doing that. It's probably 15, 20 minutes of meditation, and that was it. And it made a huge difference on race day.
That makes me think, can I interject with a gem of wisdom? Because Tish and I did it the wrong way. Before Tish and I ran, we ran the Disney Marathon in 2010, right? So a long time ago. But that night before, we were both like nervous cats, like so nervous because it's so much training, similar to like your half Ironman. Like there's so much you feel like kind of like riding on the line, like building up to this moment that you've envisioned and you've thought about. The night before, someone had, we were talking with some other marathoners at the resort we were staying at, and they were like, oh, have you ever seen, we're talking about like documentaries, and like, have you ever seen Spirit of the Marathon? And we're like, no. They're like, oh, it's a great, every marathoner should watch it, blah, 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 blah. So we watched it the night before. We went from nervous to like scared shitless.
Oh no.
About running the marathon.
No.
Because they talk about like how debilitating it is and how like all these people that have like passed out and died or having all these issues or not finishing. And those are all realities. It is a good documentary. It is a true documentary. I do recommend you watch it, just not the night before your race. Like,
oh my gosh.
Like it made us, I think we were kind of like maybe a touch naive on some of the pieces of it, of running the race, but it really did just scare the heck out of us. And I think it got in my head. So wait to watch that after you run your race, and then feel really, really proud of it. But yeah, put that one aside. Don't do as we did.
Oh my gosh.
I think visualization is really, really powerful. I think for anything in life, not even just a race. You're going on a job interview or a date or whatever, or you're dealing with a family thing, you're going for Thanksgiving and you think it's going to be stressful. I find visualization really helps me navigate potential landmines and puts me at ease. Like if this thing happens, okay, that'd be stressful, but what would you do? And then I know when I have a plan, if something goes wrong, I'm much more calm, right?
Yep.
You're not going to let it overwhelm you. So I find visualization very powerful.
For sure.
Yeah. So is there a mantra? Because she wanted, by the way, listen to the very end of the interview, because at the very, very end of the interview, she goes, wait a minute, I want to say one thing before I go. And we'd already said goodbye to her, so I hope I can edit it properly, you guys. But she said, it's really important to have a mantra that you use to manage your anxiety, your unease, or just for inspiration. So guys, do you want to share your favorite personal mantra? Jen?
So yeah, I have like a number of them. I mentioned one a little bit earlier, a couple, but one that is so weird, but it really works for me, especially in workouts, is I'm trying to even think of what the song is. It's either like a Bryan Adams song or a Dave or John Mellencamp song. There's no use complaining when you've got a job to do. Is that Summer of '69? Is that Bryan Adams?
Yes, Bryan Adams. We talked about this before.
Okay, yeah. No use complaining when you've got a job to do. I have thought that so many times during a workout, during a race or whatever. It is just like, you know what? You are here to do something. If you are not having a constructive thought that's going to help you do something right now, then you don't have the energy for that. Like focus and get it done. And that is worked for me. It is the strangest thing, but it works. What about you guys?
Mine changes up a lot too. So one of the ones that I like a lot is smile and do the work, because I really do find that smiling, even if it's more of like a horrific, painful looking grimace, it it sends a different message to the rest of your body that like, yes, I am happy to be here. I chose this. Like, this is good. Even if it hurts, even if it's difficult, this is the place that I want to be. And that was from, oh my gosh, I'm going to screw this up, but that was years and years and years ago. I think that I had interviewed the editor for Shape, maybe. I don't know. It was a long time ago, and that was hers, and I liked that. And then one of the others that I really like is I am capable. And that's just a good reminder, because sometimes I'm not great, sometimes I'm not fast. But if I'm out there, then that indicates to me that I am capable of doing what it is I set out to do. What about you, Margot?
So I've been thinking about, we interviewed Alex Silver-Fagan recently, and we asked her what her favorite mantra was, and it's, you're stronger than you think you are. And I've been using that now for the past few weeks since we've talked to her, and it really does help you, like physically, emotionally, whatever you're going through. I find that a really powerful mantra. So that was mine for me. You're stronger than you think you are.
Oh, I like it.
I like it too.
Yeah.
It's true. You always are stronger than you think you are.
Absolutely.
Yep.
All right. So are we ready for this interview with Amy Baltzell?
So ready.
Let's get to it. Amy Baltzell is a certified mental performance consultant and president of the Association for Applied Sports Psychology. She is a clinical associate professor and director of the Sports Psychology Specialization of Counseling at Boston University. Amy has worked with professional athletes and aspiring Olympians in track and field, boxing, fencing, shooting, baseball, squash, rowing, and many other sports. Amy received her bachelor's from Wesleyan University and earned a master's and doctorate from Boston University. She is a former U.S. national and Olympic rowing team member of the All-Women's America's Cup sailing team in 1995, and head varsity lightweight rowing coach at Harvard University. Amy taught the very first course of sports psychology at Harvard University. She is here today to offer her best advice on goal setting, overcoming negative thinking, the importance of mindfulness, and having a personal mantra. Welcome to the show, Amy.
Thank you. Yeah, great to be here.
Well, we're very excited to have you on the show. This is FBG Margot, and on the line today we have FBG Jen.
Hello.
And we have FBG Kristen.
Yo.
And we're just going to take turns asking you questions. We're really psyched to have you on the show today. So as we are recording this interview, it is still pretty early in the year, meaning that many people are trying to keep their New Year's resolutions. So can you give us some insight on how to sustain obtainable goals and keep motivated for new challenges?
Well, that's a big question. I think that there's a difference between what you're going to do each day, towards some goal you have, and then kind of the big picture you have for yourself. And so I think sometimes people can get caught up in, say if they say do yoga 5 days a week and they miss a day or two, they feel really badly about themselves and they've kind of fallen off the wagon and it's over. As opposed to thinking the bigger picture of what's this really about? It's about me having more flexibility or strength or peace of mind. And so it can be a little easier to recover from those times when you disappoint yourself by not kind of showing up for yourself.
So when it comes to those goals, and whether those are New Year's resolutions or they're other goals, just throughout the year or whatever, what is kind of the number one, you just talked about maybe like falling off the wagon and not getting back on. What is the other like number one glaring mistake that you see people make time and time again that you wish you could just be like, stop, don't do that?
Yeah. I think, there's a few things. One is asking too much of yourself, because I think that if you can ask a smaller thing of yourself, then it can kind of become like dominoes toward well-being and health. But if you set too lofty daily goals to start out with, it's kind of a recipe for disaster, Yeah. Or just failure. You come up short, and then you have to deal with feeling badly about yourself, and then you have to cope with that, which I think is maybe the most difficult thing to get over, self-disappointment.
Yeah.
Do you have tips for overcoming that? Sorry, not to interrupt.
Oh, I was just going to ask the same thing. Like,
okay.
Like, how do we do that?
Yeah. So, I think the first thing is to realize that it's normal. I think when we get in these moments of, and I've certainly done it myself, where I have a goal and I think I'm going to achieve it, and then I come up short, and then I feel really badly about myself, and then it feels like I'm the only person in the world feeling, badly, and everyone else looks good, as opposed to knowing it's really normal to have those feelings. And I think it can be really masterful to come up with how you're going to handle yourself when those predictable moments show up. Like, how can you be kind to yourself in that moment? Like, it's okay to feel like this. Others feel like this. Others fall off the wagon too, and I think we can shine that some kindness on ourselves instead of being harsh and self-critical, that we give ourselves a much better chance to get back on it.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And I think, a lot of us are perfectionists. And I think, a lot of athletes, their whole drive is, they're there because they want to be the best. There are some of us who are there because we just like being a part of the team, of course. But, when you get to the elite levels and, even a lot of the people that I'm just at the gym with, like, they really want to be the best.
Right.
So, how do you reconcile those two they seem kind of disparate things? Like, I want to be the best, but I want to be kind to myself.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. The first, we are human, and we will all fail sometimes. That's really a normal thing. And I think I look at it like this. If you're not kind to yourself, you shut down and quit. So I'm not saying be kind to yourself in all moments, like, oh, this rep is hard, so I'm just going to kind of ease off because it's not fun in the moment. I don't mean that. I mean when you're really getting kind of harsh on yourself and you feel like giving up. because you just can't tolerate how badly it feels to be kind of coming up short. In those moments, if we can, offer ourselves kindness, then we basically, like, you're kind of creating courage to kind of face your self-disappointment and then keep going,
Yeah.
It's a radical idea, but I think that, if you think to yourself, and there's certainly times for myself where I've, given up because I didn't want to tolerate how it didn't feel good, as opposed to imagine if in those moments you don't, again, you don't feel good about yourself, and if you can be gentle with yourself enough so you can go back to the gym, you can go back to that workout class, you can go back to eating the way that you know is best for your body.
I'm kind of an anxious person, and sometimes I can be my own worst enemy during like a physical challenge, such as, let's say, a century ride on my bike, using a new path, a new ride. So I'll worry about things like unknown routes or the other cyclists, or dumb enough, the weather. Sometimes I'm that idiot that worries about the weather. That's one thing I know I can't control. So what are your tips for helping those who operate on that kind of level?
I think that people that operate like that, there's some information that's coming in that's helpful. So it might be noticing what things that you are maybe concerned about that you can prepare for, right, that might help you. And then after that, it's just noticing that there's a kind of that part of you that's anxious and having that be okay. And intentionally bring your attention to what you know will be most helpful to you as you prepare or as you ride. So if you're caught up in the story of, like, the weather's bad and all the things you might be concerned about, the route I might get lost, you actually might miss the cue to take the correct turn. You know what I mean? If you're lost in the story in your head. So I think noticing those thoughts, honoring them enough to say, like, is there anything here that's worth really making the decision about? If not, bringing your attention and your eyes back to a place that will help you get back present in the moment.
So I have a question that I think maybe a little bit, I don't know, could be a little bit of a catch-22. And you kind of, I think you touched a little bit on this before, but I just want to go a touch deeper on it. So for a lot of these athletes and just people that are kind of driven by perfectionism and they want to be the best, and that's where they get a lot of self-worth is by winning. Who doesn't like to win? Winning feels awesome. You truly, you love yourself and you have your self-compassion. If you're like a top-level athlete and that's kind of like you're striving for other stuff, do you find that some of the athletes you work with lose some of their competitive drive and motivation, or does it just change? Can you talk about that?
No, I mean, the kind of athletes I see are the kind of athletes who they come to me because they are that kind of perfectionist. Maybe the top 5 in the country or 10 in the world, or that type of person. And what can happen is if you cave into anxiety or fear, that criticism, you end up doing worse. It's debilitating. And so the perfectionists that I work with, when they can notice what their, self-criticism is doing to their performance, like, a high jumper who runs off and doesn't take the jump, or the, miler who at the last lap, caves because they're not willing to live in the uncertainty of winning and losing and being willing to be okay with that and go for it, So to me, the self-compassion isn't about going soft, and there's plenty of research on it that indicates it actually helps increase your motivation, your persistence, your willingness to try harder and stay in it.
Do you have any specific exercises you would recommend for someone who, like Margot was talking about, getting really nervous before a century ride, or, I know when I was in high school, before even my volleyball practices, I would get so nervous. It was, it definitely hindered my performance, but it also just hindered life. So if we're talking about either athletes or just, people who are trying to get fit and they're experiencing those nerves coming up,
yes,
what tricks or, in the moment things would you suggest for quelling those nerves, aside from, because I know, be present, become okay with either winning or losing, doing well or doing poorly, but that's a little bit big picture, right?
Yes. So what I have found that can be really helpful is first just recognizing that those feelings are there, which is not hard to do because they tend to be really strong.
Oh, yeah.
and right, be overwhelming. And first, as you say, have it be okay that they're there. And then what I found, if you pair that with then visualizing how you'd like it to be, say, when you're on your bike, how do you want to be feeling and what do you want to be focusing on, and get an image and get a feeling for what that will be like when you are riding in the way that you want to be riding. and feel the kind of joy that can come from shifting your attention and being more engaged with the actual activity. Does that make sense? And so it's both accepting it is as it is, but then imagining, visualizing how you'd like it to go ideally. That I found has been incredibly helpful.
So I wanted to talk to you about mind over matter thinking, and it's one of those mantras people kind of will tell you, oh, it's just mind over matter, right? And to achieve a goal. But are there times when you really should pay attention to the matter and not ignore it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so it's a fine line these days, isn't it? And you talk about the athletes that are really pushing the edge to be the very best. But I think that it's actually really important to be present and know when you're just pushing in a way that may be extremely uncomfortable, but you know it's right. In those moments when you know that this actually is going to damage my body, and if I don't stop, it's going to have kind of short-term and long-term implications. And so that information is very important to pay attention to. Yes.
So you're studying the impact of mindfulness meditation training and sports.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about like how you actually research that and study that, and maybe some of the coolest things that you've learned through that process?
Yeah, sure. So it started out with my interest in mindfulness, and I had a local meditation teacher who created a meditation intervention for athletes. And he and I, over the years, have collaborated and revised it. So it's both a mindfulness and self-compassion intervention. And so we've run about 10 studies on it. So it's like you get data, say different kind of, measures of mindfulness and well-being before and after the intervention, and looking at the changes based on the intervention. So that's how we've studied it. But, some things that we found that are remarkable is that the athletes, this question of being kind to yourself, they absolutely have loved it, men and women. Olympic level, Division I collegiate level athletes have loved it because it gives them a different way to deal with the feelings of pressure. That usually they say just stop thinking, just go do your thing. People can't do that, and so people are left with like you describing the anxiety and fear, and like how do you handle that, and how this intervention has offered a way to teach them how to accept the thoughts and get their attention back on the game, whether it's basketball, tennis, running, whatever it is.
And have they had huge strides? Have you seen some cases where people have just like completely changed like how they play and had more success?
And like more anecdotal.
Yeah.
Like one of the tennis players, it was like a lot of he'd have a lot of rage and would throw his racket and that kind of thing, and he was able to learn to notice that moment of being furious when someone calls a point the wrong way. And the urge to throw the racket, and noticing that urge and making a decision to bring this attention back on tennis. I mean, that kind of example happened over and over with athletes, in that moment were able to tolerate those feelings and get their attention back on what they needed to do to be successful. So
I could have used that in high school tennis. I'll tell you that. I really could have used that.
Yeah, that's why I created it. I could have used it too. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about, high-level elite athletes.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the mental side of finding motivation for someone who just really doesn't feel like working out. They know they should. They want to do it in theory, but it just doesn't sound fun.
Yeah. And so I think about ideally, you'd choose some kind of activity that's a match that is enjoyable, but sometimes it's not. And so I think that's when we have to go to, what is it that I truly value here? And if they can hook into something they value for themselves and care for themselves. And also the idea that generally people begin to love their own habits. And so it might be initially they don't like it, but probably over time they will start to like it, So just knowing that kind of like, I don't like this will be short-lived.
Yeah, that's great.
So I was reading on Mind Body Green that you believe it is important to be a little selfish when you're setting goals, as it will work to your advantage. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's interesting, that take on that. So I look at it like this. And so if any of you have ever been told to do something, if you've been on a team, you have to go run, 5 miles a day. You have to go, lift an hour and a half a day, whatever it is. It's important that whatever we're involved in, that we personally value what we're doing. So even if someone else tells us we need to do something, we need to find the part of ourselves where it's like, I don't feel like running stadiums. I don't feel like lifting weights. But it's like, is there any part of yourself that you value for your own reasons, regardless of what everyone else wants and thinks? And we hook into that part of ourselves. We choose, we feel volitional, we feel self-determined. We'll be way more successful and much more likely to stay engaged in whatever we're doing.
Yay for being selfish.
Yep.
When it gets down to it, those moments when you don't feel like it, but if you're thinking like, I don't feel like this, but I know that this is something that I want to improve for myself because it's important to me personally, you're much more likely to do it than just think my boss wants me to do it or my coach wants me to do it,
Oh, 100%. We talk a lot about, it's a slightly different twist on it, but we talk a lot about finding your why, like not someone else's why, not what society tells you the why should be, but what your personal why is, as your inner motivation. Yep. So has all of your work and research, like how has it affected your own health and fitness and just overall well-being and approach to feeling good?
Wow, it's thanks for asking that question. Mm-hmm. I think before all this started, I was someone who was very intense and driven and hard on myself. I found myself much more at ease and able to take, difficult moments and it's easier for me to handle it now. And so I don't get sidetracked and I don't waste my energy and I'm able to put my energy where I want to put it.
Yeah. Awesome.
It's been kind of miraculous, truthfully. That's part of the reason I want to share this work.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
So you're an elite athlete and you've worked with and studied elite athletes. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, like with all of your experience with people at that level, do you have any feel for how much of that kind of athletic success has to do with genetics and natural ability versus someone's drive and the mental aspect?
Yeah. That's such a great question. It's the nature versus nurture question. Is it just biological or is it effort? And I think that from my read on the research and understanding, our current understanding is that it tends to be a blend,
Yeah, that makes sense.
You can't be a great center basketball player in pro basketball unless you're 7 feet tall. There's some realities to that. But boy, again, as a sports psychologist, I guess I'm biased, but the mindset, the approach, the willingness to engage, it's that ultimate, I think for the elite, the top athletes, you have to have that too. It just can't be physical gift anymore. It's not enough. So I think for the top athletes, it's got to be definitely some genetics and maybe even more mental.
Yeah.
So just taking a trip on the Wayback Machine or in the Wayback Machine, going back to, I want you to talk about the first Olympics you remember following and who are your early Olympic heroes?
Oh gosh, this may not be part of this because, I didn't grow up like that. I grew up with out in the cornfields with a town of 500 people, very little access to media.
Wow.
My time was with like riding horses bareback with no bridle, no saddle, chasing pigs for fun. It was like, I'm not even kidding. So I came from such a different era. That's not how I thought. To me, it wasn't. I'm not into the hero and admiration of others. It's more like sport to me was like almost like a spiritual, soulful experience for myself. A place to be joyful, a place to be engaged, a place for friendship, a place to see what my body could do. I found it just fascinating. So it was more that for me than it was like heroes.
Interesting. And then you became a rower.
Yeah. So I played high school basketball, tennis, lacrosse, college basketball, college rowing, and then I ended up on the U.S. team for rowing for 4 years in the Olympic team '92, and then I was a professional sailor on the America's Cup sailing team in 1995, the all-women sailing team.
Okay, so then I have to ask, how can I get better on the rower?
Okay, got to use your legs.
Okay, damn it.
You got to connect.
There's not like a mind trick. I can just be like, you're better on the rower. You're better on the rower. It never happened.
It's funny. Even it's funny story. I remember one of my teammates who pulled like around a 6-minute 32-second, I think it was, erg for a female on a 2,000 meters was just like mind blowing. And I remember saying to her, like, how do you do it? And she's like, Baltzell, don't you understand? Doesn't matter if you're best in the world or not. It's really painful.
Right.
Yes.
It's just like, it takes us all down to our knees, that machine. But, it's connection with the legs, it's rhythm, and hanging on your arms as long as you can. Yeah.
Okay.
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 And I wasn't best in the world. Maybe I was one of the top, maybe 3 or 4 in the country at one point, but not the best.
Well, that's, I mean, that.
Yeah.
That counts.
Okay.
I would take about 1 million rungs below that and be okay.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm barely top 3 in my gym, and there are only 4 machines.
Yeah, that's kind of, yeah.
Okay, so I want to know what your thoughts on workout buddies are.
Yeah.
And like, in addition to like whether you think yay, nay, whatever, are
Yeah.
there any tips you have for like what to look for or what to avoid in a workout buddy if you really want them to help you reach your goals?
You have to have somebody who you enjoy being around. You have to have someone who maybe is similarly matched to you in terms of whatever your activity is, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, someone who's going to show up. I mean, that's probably the number one thing. Someone who's going to show up and not try to knock you down, but someone who's like energetically is like with you and wants you also to improve and be there.
Oh, that's a good point.
Because it can become competitive, you know, and it can become a little bit like wishing you're better than the other one, and that's not so good. So I think genuinely wishing well for each other would be a good basic, and showing up would be the most important things.
Yeah.
It makes me think that's like Aristotle, you know. Go back to Aristotle, but anyway, that's another. You want to talk about Aristotle?
I'm game. Let's hear it.
Yeah, I want to hear it.
No, he's like, you know, he's saying true friendship, it starts with goodwill toward the other. You want to have a good friendship, you have to have goodwill toward the other. And then the other thing is you have to match each other in areas of excellence, like, you know, it would be in moderation in terms of motivation. You have to have someone similarly match the motivation in terms of effort, in terms of what you care about, and in terms of what gives you pleasure and what gives you pain. So if it gives you both great pleasure to go for really hard 10-mile runs and it's just like, oh, your soul is filled, that's probably the right guy to go running with.
Yeah.
I have one more question that I'm gonna throw in here that just kind of came to me. I know I hear this from a lot of different people, and I've even said it myself and felt it myself at different times, which is just like, you know what, I really don't like competition, or I don't feel like I'm competitive, or I don't want to put myself, like it almost feels scary, or like just the fear of kind of just going head to head with someone, or maybe they're not going to like you, or maybe you're going to beat them, or all kinds of stuff. What are your thoughts on all that? And how to get over that?
No, you know, I think it's a major problem in our country in general. I think people like to go against people when they're sure they can win.
Yeah.
And I think starts. I mean, it used to be like, you know, elite, and then it was collegiate, and then it was high school. Now it's down to our 6-year-olds. You know, so we're trained that unless you can win, you're not like worthy. And so it's really, I think it's hard to put ourselves in uncertain situations. So I think that it's a common feeling. The only way to get over it is to have like self-respect for being willing to be out there and put yourself out there and be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And take great pride in being able to be vulnerable and give your best effort. And it's a problem that people don't want to do that anymore, you know?
Yeah.
Right.
Interesting. Okay, one more question. I'm sorry. Sorry, guys.
I feel so honored.
Do you have thoughts about like kids in sports? Like,
I have thoughts. Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. I mean, I could go like a million different directions with it, but like any sort of big take homes for parents who might be listening.
Oh, wow. So I wrote a book about 10 years ago called Whose Game Is It Anyway? Just around this. One of the big takeaways from that book, which I thought was really good for parents, is when you put your kids in sport, you know your child in terms of, you know, if they really want to be there or not, you know, that's the thing. Also, know the environment you're putting them in, and make sure you're putting an environment, because, you know, there's a whole range of types of coaches out there. Making sure to coach in a situation that you believe will be positive for your kid. And the third one, which I see a lot with some of my kind of intense friends with kids, is you got to make sure that it's not about you. It's about your child. So it's not about you. So people can put excessive pressure on their kids because they're living through them. You know, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a whole other parenting course.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing.
Yeah. So can I follow that up with a question for the coaches? Because I'm guessing I'm not the only one here who's coached kids, and, you know, it can be really hard, you know, especially when you have like the parents pushing, and then the kid wanting to please mom and dad, wanting to please the coach, but, you know, maybe having a hard time finding their own personal motivation for why they want to be there. Do you have any any thoughts on what a coach can do to either better identify that or better help a child, or, even not a child, just one of their athletes, handle that a bit better?
So that's a big question. And I think to me, it would really depend on, we talk about 6-year-olds or 10-year-olds or 14-year-olds or what level we're talking about. But I would say, like, kind of really broadly, I think a coach can always say things like kind of be educational without asking the athlete to respond. So you don't have to embarrass them or make them vulnerable. We can say things like, you know what, like, I really, I appreciate the parents are very enthusiastic. I appreciate there's a lot of, encouragement from the crowds. But what really matters is that you look inside yourself and remember why you're playing for your own reasons too.
You know, I love that.
That's really nice.
Yeah. Because otherwise, I mean, I have so many stories going through my head, but I've had clients where I remember one kid, she's just like dogging it and just didn't want to push herself. And, talking to her, and she's like, well, it was the same thing. Like, my parents expect so much and the coach expects so much, and really resisting that. And I said, if you put your parent aside and you put your coach aside and you look inside your heart, what do you want? She's like, well, God, I really want to run. I'm like, well, then great. Like, then who cares what your parents or coach wants? Who cares if you're pleasing them or not? Do it for yourself, And it was very freeing for that kid. And I think that's something we can all learn from.
A lot of adults could use that advice too.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
All of us, like, you guys do this. I've heard this show. Fantastic. You guys do a great job. And kind of in your own hearts, like, what am I trying to give here? Why am I doing this for my own reasons? Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Aw, group hug.
Do you have any other questions?
I'm good.
I've
thrown in so many. I think I'm good. Kristen?
Yeah, I'm all set. Margot, I think we can go to the final one.
Okay, so are you ready for our final question, Amy?
I think I am, yes.
Okay, here we go. What was the last song you listened to before you did this podcast interview? Better be good. No pressure, but...
It must have been a song by Passenger.
Oh, okay.
Huh.
Love Passenger.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
But with 3 Kids and a Big Job, I don't always think about the name of the songs. I just like this. I like the vibe of the person, the soul of the person. I think it's got a beautiful soul.
Awesome.
That is awesome.
Can I just say one more thing, just in case? Because I had these notes. What I wanted to say, I didn't say one thing. Is that okay?
Go for it.
Go for it.
I think don't expect to always be motivated. You can't always expect to be motivated because we're not. But I think there's this thing of having a go-to phrase of something that is it's a inspiring value to you, like that could be motivating, could be helpful. So even if you're not feeling it, if you can remember why, and I think it's probably back to your why. But having a phrase ready that you can bring to mind is prepared in advance, if that makes sense.
What's yours?
Yeah.
If you want to share, I did.
Because I'm in a different phase of my life right now. I feel like I'm very much in tune with what I need and what I want. I just go with. I feel inspired all the time, so I don't think I have to pick one.
Just comes to you. You just have it. Yeah.
You know what?
And evolve.
I guess it was no good point there because I.
It was.
I think it was great. Yeah.
Because for myself, at this point, I do just feel inspired. I feel grateful to be here on this planet. So that's kind of where I'm at.
That's a pretty good phrase.
Amy, thank you so much for being on the show today. You're a fantastic guest.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Love this show? Tell us why in a 5-star review on iTunes and we'll read it on the air. Also, make sure you are a subscriber. If you want to reach out to say hi or have a question about a recent episode, yay, well, feel free to email us at podcast@fitbottomgirls.com. And if this podcast jives perfectly with your brand, consider sponsoring the show. Get more info by emailing advertising@fitbottomgirls.com. Find all kinds of Fit Bottom goodness online and on social media at Fit Bottom Girls, Fit Bottom Mamas, Fit Bottom Eats, and Fit Bottom Zen. And if books and movies are your thing, check out the other podcast I co-host called Book versus Movie, which you can find anywhere where you search for podcasts. Thanks for listening.